Hello, my name's Caroline Davies and welcome to Bombora TV and our look at the future of video in learning. Today in the UK, over 15 million people will watch over 200 million videos online. And just this month, over 35 million people will each watch almost 17 hours of video. Every day, more and more of us not only watch videos online, but comment on, link to, and share videos online. In the past 3 years, visits to online video sites have grown by a whopping 80%. And YouTube is now the third biggest website in the UK. Right now, video makes up 30% of internet traffic. By just 2013, it'll be 90%. Online video is already a huge part of the way that we communicate with each other, with ideas, and increasingly with brands. Video helps your website and your business get seen. Websites with video receive more clicks, increased response rates, and helps put your business on the first page of search engines. Videos have both visual and audio information, which complement each other and result in high levels of engagement, making knowledge retention much easier. After 72 hours of viewing, the average human can retain 10% of text, 65% of images, and 95% of video. With the emergence of faster broadband speeds and 4G technology, video can increasingly be used to compress time and space for companies wanting to streamline knowledge dissemination. And an event doesn't need to be limited only to those who can attend. It can be filmed and shared to everyone who wishes to benefit from its content, both nationally and internationally. Whatever your business is, online video can help you communicate with your customers, your stakeholders, and even your employees. An increasingly used channel in the marketing mix is the use of the webinar, also known as webcasting. This content delivers information efficiently to potential customers, whilst overcoming the hurdles presented by geography, time, and costs. In this session, we'll explore how effective webinars can be in delivering marketing content. And to help us explore this question, we're very pleased to have on hand two true experts in the digital media sector. Steffan Aquarone is an entrepreneur and award-winning film producer who is the Econsultancy community's lead video trainer. His venioservices.co.uk consultancy counts Tesco, Royal Bank of Scotland and Waitrose amongst its clientele. Joining Steffan, we're equally pleased to welcome digital and social marketing consultant Darika Ahrens, who the Financial Times have referred to in 2009 as a new breed of business matchmaker. Formerly an analyst with Forrester Research and now running Grapevine Consulting, Darika has worked with brands like Microsoft, Philips and Estee Lauder, and been featured in the New York Times, the BBC and The Guardian. Steffan and Darika will present their perspectives on how effective webinar content can be in the marketing mix. So Steffan, if we can begin with you, what's your viewpoint?
Thanks. So I've got a few personal anecdotes to share, as well as my objective opinion about this type of media. Because as you've heard, I come from an independent background, and I'll share with you candidly and honestly from my own experiences, and also tell you a bit about what I think is going to come in the future. So in terms of the specifics, I want to share a case study. I want to discuss and share some winning strategies as well that I hope you'll be able to take away and apply to your own projects, whichever direction you choose to go with this stuff. But I first of all want to just cover off what a webinar actually is and make sure we're all on the same page. So forgive me for introducing a business model diagram so early on in my presentation. But this is the way that I think a lot of us think about customer engagement and about sales. And we have to remember that as marketers, we're not here just to sell, but we are here to help our organizations fulfill and meet their business objectives. And most business objectives in most organizations are ultimately around selling a product or a service. So when we look at generic ways of describing the customer buying procedure, we might traditionally have referred to an awareness raising stage where we do a bunch of stuff to shout about us, a consideration stage where the customer might think about the product and whether they're going to buy and who from, and then we kind of convert them and we get them to do what we want, and that's buy our product. And one of the interesting things with the web is that our consumers, our customers, people have become a lot more empowered in this game. And our ability to push them through traditional sales processes like this has been weakened by the advent of the web. in particular the social web, which allows real people to share what they truly think, not just in person-to-person conversation, but also in permanent indelible ink on the web. And so my feeling is that we've kind of lost control of most of the process. We can do stuff ourselves, we can originate things like advertising campaigns and marketing campaigns that raise awareness, but really we have to be very humbled to the ability of our consumers and our customers to do a lot of the consideration themselves, to choose who they're going to listen to, and really to choose what they want to hear before they go ahead and make a buying decision. So I've kind of sketched a few interruptions on this new digital marketing world, and I don't think really that much has changed, but one thing that's changed a lot is the relationship we have with our customers. And almost as a direct extension, the things that they do before they make a purchase decision have, if anything, just gone up. There are now so many different ways in which people can discover products, make decisions about what they're going to buy and who from. And so if you're looking at either an only digital strategy or even if you're combining elements of offline and online marketing, I think what you find is that no individual's route to making a buying decision is going to be the same as the other individuals. So you've got a lot of people doing different things, reaching your organization in different ways. And to sort of try and locate webinar in this new world of complicated customer-driven interaction, I think we're best off thinking about it as a way in which we can play into the appetite that consumers have for three things: stuff that's interesting, stuff that's useful, and stuff that's entertaining. And by those three things, I guess we mean content. And Darika will talk to you much more about content marketing, but I think to me, webinar is something which an organization produces for the sole interests of its customers, not necessarily for the sole interest of the sales guys who want to sell more products. So it's not an advert, it's something which is useful, interesting, and entertaining to the end customer. And it plays into the number of different things they might do before they make their own decision about who they want to buy from. And this little diagram here is just a few of the other things they're doing when they're choosing whether or not to even watch your webinar, let alone whether to buy your product. So this all comes with a pretty strong health warning, and that is that people don't actually need our marketing. And unlike traditional TV advertising in the 1960s, where they had to watch it if they wanted to watch the shows, they don't have to read or listen to or watch any of the stuff we're producing. And that's a really, really big problem for a lot of organizations, because a lot of organizations have been used to people listening to them and what they have to say kind of regardless. Whereas now there are so many other channels, so many other options, so many other places people can go to get the content that they want to learn from or use or be entertained by, that if we're going to stand out and make something that's going to work, and by work I mean contribute towards fulfilling our business objectives, we have to, absolutely have to, make it something that is useful, interesting, or entertaining, and or a combination of all three of those things. So I would say that the question, are webinars any good, is virtually meaningless, because what actually matters is whether the content of those webinars is useful, interesting, or entertaining to its target audience. So there aren't billions of people out there saying, oh, I wish I could find a webinar. There are people out there saying, I wish I could find the answer to this question. And webinar might be the best way of you offering those guys the answer to their question, and in so doing, hopefully beginning them on a journey which leads in a sale. So that's my little tuppence worth on whether they're any good or not. On the assumption that they're useful and they're a great and cost-effective way to deliver your content, which I think they are, I think the next question is, what's the winning combination of ingredients? What's the winning strategy for helping you to get value out of your webinar content and lead people closer towards making a buying decision with you without being overtly salesy? That's kind of the balance we have to tread, because clearly we're not just giving this stuff away for free for fun, we're giving it away for free to help us with our marketing and if anything, create a sort of halo around our organization so we're seen as a really great bunch of people that can do and say useful things. And if that works, then they might go on and buy. So I think I've got a few winning strategies, a case study to share with you, and then some thoughts about the future. I'm going to go into those straight away. The first winning strategy, I think, if you agree with what I've said so far, is treat your webinar like a real-world event. So if you were putting on a big, shiny conference and people had to travel and get up early in the morning and choose to spend half or a whole day with you, what would you be putting into that conference? You would be putting quite a lot of useful stuff into that conference. You'd probably be hiring interesting speakers with a particular expertise on a particular topic. and you'd make sure that that experience, that event was arguably useful for the delegates who chose to turn up. And really what a webinar is a smarter, cheaper way of executing on that value proposition that has a far more global reach without incurring any extra cost. It's also got the benefit that it can be scalable without any extra cost too. So with a conference, if you're paying for it, you're always going to have a kind of delegate cost, whereas with a webinar, if you are paying per view, then it's going to be pence. Probably you're only going to be paying for it to be produced and hosted, and then every time you get a new viewer, that's an extra bit of value at no extra cost. So I think that's what it's like. It's a real world event, but done in an online way. But that doesn't mean you can compromise on the value of what's being put into the webinar. Another thing I think you've got to do, as I said, the kind of medium itself is pretty irrelevant. The content is what matters. And to get content that matters to your audience, you've got to understand your audience and give them content that makes them tick. And if you're in a B2C brand in particular, there are some fairly grisly, boring, inevitable, slightly numbing conclusions about what people really like online. And you don't need me to tell you which of the videos from last year on YouTube was the most sensational and highly viewed, to realize that the stuff that people find entertaining in particular is pretty unpredictable and pretty wide-ranging in taste. So you can actually, a good place to start would be to just look around and see what else is popular in your particular niche. But the most important thing to think about is who you're actually trying to present this stuff to, and then think about what they're going to find useful. This is not about you, it's about your audience. So winning strategy number 2 is know your audience and know what makes them tick. I think as an extension of this, but as a sort of particular specific warning to some examples I've seen in the past where it hasn't been quite so good, having decided what's going to make your audience tick, you've got to make sure that you're talking about something that's relevant to them and not to you. There's temptation for marketers and salespeople, and most people in business, is to talk about themselves, talk about their products and services because they're really passionate about them. But most of our customers or would-be customers actually don't care a huge amount about your product. They care about the problem they've got or the question they've got, not the product. So it's important to focus the content that you're speaking about around problems that are already relevant to your audience, and not to make the whole thing about some new thing that you need to convince them that they care about, because chances are they don't. So tip number 3, talk about something that's already relevant to people, and just make sure that at no cost does this become a kind of product demo opportunity. You wouldn't pay and travel to go to a conference just to listen to some guy bang on about their product all day. And finally, on winning strategies, in fact, penultimately, I think you've got to be really careful about the audience that you distribute and market the event to. And in the same way that you wouldn't mail shot every single customer who has a car in Britain to tell them about your car conference, you'd probably be more selective and targeted in who you invite. I think with webinar, and in particular in B2B, you're going to get a much, much better conversion rate from invitation to attendance if you focus on people that you've already got a relationship with. And that might just be they are in your lead pipeline as somebody who's once opened an email and once clicked a link, or as a connection on social media. But I think to start and to invite people who are already somewhere in your pipeline means that you can use webinar to move them from whatever stage they're at the moment 1 or 2 steps closer. That might mean converting some people into customers, pushing them over the line, but it might just mean bringing other people who are already on the external perimeters of your sales pipeline slightly closer into you. And there might be something else that takes them a little bit closer still. So my tip would be really try, when you first do it, to invite people who you've already got some sort of relationship with, and use that as your kind of your beta test, if you like. Because the last thing you want to do is become spammy. And everybody hates spam, and the Monty Python song, spam, 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 it's everywhere, is why spam is called spam. And by that I mean unsolicited emails from people we've never heard about before, trying to get us to do something even though we've got no reason on earth to do what they're asking us to do. And we know what we all do with those emails. We delete them, we don't act on them, and if anything, it causes a negative brand implication or brand impact on us, the end consumer. So I would really caution against blanket mail shotting of your webinars and focus on the people you already know. Just one more set of tips. I clearly can't count my own slides. I think it's always worth offering something to the people who didn't attend. as much as it is to follow up with the people that did. So if you focus on your pipeline and then you find that only 10% turn up, maybe that's no bad thing, because the fact that the people you've contacted about the event are all people you kind of have a relationship with already means you can go back to the guys that didn't come with maybe a link to the PowerPoint or a set of documents or some other way of which they can follow up, or even a view-on-demand video of what happened on the day. So I want to tell you a case study now, because I've banged on about the theory, and I want to try and put this all into practice and tell you a story that is true, first of all, and also in real life, something which you can maybe relate to in your own businesses. And that's a business that I work with called Bhutto. They're an online video platform, and they help big organizations to plan, execute, distribute, and publish and measure their online video. So it's like a YouTube, but for big businesses. And so they have a B2B remit. They kind of know that the people that might buy their product are in marketing or sales, marketing or IT. And the strategy behind the webinars that I did with them was to take everyone in that pipeline slightly closer into the business. And this is how we did it. So first of all, we invited everybody who was in our CRM system. And these were people who were customers. They were people who had kind of put a brief together and were kind of potential immediate new customers, right the way through to people who'd only ever followed us on Twitter or responded to one email. And there were about 5,000 of them. So it wasn't a blanket mail shot, it was targeted, and actually it was tailored to the subdivisions of that total CRM system so that we could ever so slightly tweak the message for the people depending on where they were in the pipeline. And the more you customize an email, the more successful it's going to be. We used calendar invites as well as HTML emails. That was quite interesting because it sort of stands out of the inbox if you send someone a calendar invite. It was really tiresome trying to send 5,000 Outlook invites, but really, really worthwhile because we had people who responded to the calendar invite and turned up on the day who didn't respond to any of the other emails. So we'd have had no other indication that they were interested in coming if we just left it up to the email. We sent countdown and reminders to the people that had clicked on the link in the email. And that was really useful because you know, if they've expressed an interest, then the chances of you sending them a reminder being felt like spam is quite low, and it worked very, very well. We got people who anecdotally fed back that oh, they didn't really hear the first message, and it was the last-minute thing that happened to catch them on the right day that got them to come along. We focused the content on the webinars on general advice. So we wanted people to feel like the whole experience they'd invested their time in was 100% relevant to them and not about us pushing the product. We obviously mentioned the product, but it was quite clear from the hosting environment that they were there because Bhutto had invited them. But we worked out some sort of 5 really important, useful things we could explain about online video in general that they could use and get value from whether or not they ever became a client of Bhutto. So one example was how to interpret online video metrics. That's great if you're using YouTube, it's great if you're a Bhutto customer, and it was a really useful discussion that we had during the interactive presentation. We did make it interactive. I don't think you have to, but we did, and that meant people could type in questions during the webinar. And that led to some really interesting discussions, and one of the people who actually asked a question ended up being a client, because in asking that question we understood exactly what their needs were. So it gave us a really great insight into what our clients were thinking. And like I said, we contacted everyone who attended, 35 of them. We contacted everybody who didn't attend but did click on one of the links in one of the emails. And the kind of outcome was that we had two new clients in that space of time. Bearing in mind this is a big enterprise product that we know attended the webinar and that the webinar made up part of their experience of getting to know the company and making that decision. So I'm going to skip ahead quite quickly now. That's the story of Bhutto and how we used a webinar to get, albeit 2, but really high value, big brand, excellent, perfect customers. And the cost to us was very minimal indeed. I've given you some numbers in that case study. I think analytics are pretty important in this space. I think you shouldn't be doing anything important or expensive unless you can measure it. And although webinar is less expensive than video, it's quite time consuming, quite time expensive. So the sorts of things you can use analytics and measurement to do in your webinar, other than tracking who ends up becoming a client, are you can have somebody in your team whose job it is constantly to kind of use whatever insights you've got to temperature check the audience throughout, and that can help you improve on the content next time. It can help you work out whether you need to speed up or slow down during the event. So that's something that we did and helped us to inform and improve on the subsequent events that we organised. I think you can also use analytics to see the nasty, painful dropout curve and what that looks like. So how many people are actually dropping out of the webinar altogether and leaving the chat room or stopping watching the video if it's pre-recorded. And that can give you, again, really useful structural insight into how you can better position your content next time. I think a really powerful measurement is how many people take the next step that you offer them. So if our goal is to bring people closer to the purchase decision with webinar, then we want to be able to measure how many of them take a next step that's closer to the business, closer to the decision line. And to do that, we have to have a next step that we offer. It's no good saying, well, thanks for coming by. The best thing to do is to give you something that you can attribute directly to the outcome of that successful event. So a link to download is a great indicator that they've taken a decision to come one step closer and download and take something away. And of course, the ability to capture CRM data is really powerful too. And this was perhaps the most valuable anecdotal outcome, was that when the sales guys saw the results, obviously they were really pleased that there were 2 clients that came very quickly out of it. But also they knew that of the 30 clients that didn't immediately sign up, the 30 prospects, the fact they'd been there and the fact that we could add their attendance to our understanding our information about their journey meant that those sales guys could go and talk to their clients, talk to those contacts, but also there were some concentrations from different sectors, and the fact that we had 5 there from automotive made the sales guys realise there was quite a big buzz going on in the automotive industry. So capturing CRM data and using it intelligently is really important too. And finally, just a few notes on the future. I think one of the aspects of the future of webinar that we're going to see is the sort of increased expectation that what we're delivering, if we're delivering it at a certain time, i.e. if it's a live interactive event, we have to make it really clear what the value proposition of attending at that time, at that place is going to be. So people are getting much, much more frantic and busy with their time management these days. And if we're going to get them to go to a certain place at a certain time, when they might want to just watch whatever they want, whenever they want, there has to be a really compelling reason why they've got to join in there and then. So if you're doing anything live, then the fact that you can ask questions of the speaker is a really powerful example of something that makes it really worthwhile tuning in there and then. I think in the future of webinar, we'll see a lot more focus on multilingual because, as I've already said, the geographic reach is almost limitless. And yet English is not the only language in which people do business, and I think we'll see some smarter technologies coming online to enable us to multicast and translate in real time to help access international audiences. Talking of multicast, I think the genuine multicast is kind of the next step for corporate use of webinars. I know some businesses are using Google Huddle, and it's a great product. But the ability to have every participant come in and speak and be on screen and interact even closer to the real world experience, I think is the next step for enterprise products as well. And there are lots of reasons why you might choose to use an enterprise product for these purposes. I think they're going to see new ways to interact as well. And I think the webinar and even the interactive kind of true multicast with lots of video feeds from everyone who's there is still a couple of steps away from the full potential of virtual presentation formats. We've seen things happen in Second Life. We've seen entire conferences organised in Second Life, and we're starting to see the emergence of some B2B tools that let you put all of your delegates into one virtual room, and they can not just interact with the speaker, but they might be able to go and choose between different streams in a virtual environment if they want to behave just like a real-world conference. And again, the sort of benefit is that it's much, much cheaper than organising, let alone getting everyone who's there to come and pay to attend a conference in the real world. So that is my probably more than tuppence worth. Yeah, I hope that was interesting. If you do have any questions, get in touch with these guys or get in touch with me, but suffice to say, I think this is a great opportunity for most brands, so long as you can identify the thing that's going to make your audience find what you're saying useful, interesting or entertaining. And to do that, you've got to stop talking about yourself and just think about what matters to your audience.
Thanks so much, Steffan. That was absolutely great. Thank you. So over to you, Darika. How do you see the effectiveness of webinars as a marketing tool?
Sure. Well, first I thought it might be useful to kind of define what is webinar. And I guess in technical terms, a webinar is just a seminar that takes place on the web. The problem is with this heritage of seminars, the seminars are something that have become a little bit kind of salesy, a little bit kind of grubby. So, typically you'd see this newspaper advertisement, it would say, do you want to make £1 million working from home? And you turn up at some hotel room and you'd listen to a free speech, and then there would be some salespeople, you know, sort of pressuring you before you leave the room to like buy something or sign up for something. So it's really kind of thinking about, it's not just translating the seminar experience onto the web. So how do webinars sit in the marketing mix? Well, I also think it's useful to think of webinar marketing, in fact, any content marketing in terms of customer journeys. So traditionally, when brands ran webinars, they were predominantly thinking about like lead generation. It's just about getting people to sign up so we can have their email address and phone number and the sales team can sign them. That was one of the core uses for it. But actually now we're seeing people increasingly understanding the need for content marketing. So they have a lot of digital channels that they're running and they need content for that. And webinar is just becoming one part of the arsenal of that. So this is how I view the customer life cycle, but in general there are 4 stages to the customer life cycle. The first is awareness, when you find out about the brand. Then there's consideration about the brand, when you kind of start to have an interaction with the brand, thinking about purchase. Finally, you move on to purchase, you buy a product or a service. And then finally there's this post-sale stage, which is often forgotten. And this sort of plays to the idea that actually nowadays we're a lot more savvy as marketers about thinking about once we acquire a customer, we want to keep that customer, we want them to repurchase from us, and also we maybe want them to evangelize for us and go and recruit other customers. So your business might differ a little bit, there might be 5 stages or 6 stages, but probably these are generally the 4 phases that your customer goes through. So there's a couple of ways, or there's 3 ways actually, that webinars can fit into this marketing mix. And the post-sale stage, this is the kind of newer phase that I'm talking about that brands are starting to get quite savvy with. And I think a really interesting use of webinars here is how people are using webinars to educate and support their customers. So they're almost using webinars as a learning resource to ensure that they retain their customer. So maybe once I've signed up for my kind of, you know, complicated software solution, instead of me calling the help desk every week and saying I can't get something to work, or I want to cancel my subscription, I'm too frustrated. You know, a lot of brands are setting up webinars as an educational system to ensure that their customers are happy and they retain them with their product. The other area is the awareness phase. So this is when you want people to discover your brand. So some brands are successfully setting up webinars, usually a webinar series, growing their presence, looking like thought leaders, promoting the business in that way by trying to generate leads and generate awareness and business into the brand. And then there's the most traditional phase that a lot of us are familiar with, the consideration phase. And this is where people are using webinars to give quite detailed education to customers about how their product or their goods or their services work, with the aim that that webinar is going to convert them onto the next stage, which is purchase. So 3 different ways to think about using webinars. So it's not just about using webinar in one way to convert to purchase. There might be other ways that you're using it. So a few examples of this. This is Comscore. So they're the digital analytics company. What Comscore does is they showcase their industry expertise with regular webinars. So this is an example of they're really targeting that awareness phase of the customer life cycle. They want people to know Comscore experts are available, that they're using Comscore data, they're coming up with a lot of thought-leading information. And if you go to the Comscore site, you'll see they regularly have a lot of listings about webinar topics that they're running that are everything to do with where they provide analytics service. So it's not about the product, they're not talking about Comscore, the brand, all the time, but they're talking about their thought leadership and their knowledge of the industry and sharing that. Adobe does it slightly differently though. So they are running a series of webinars like Comscore, but theirs are pretty upfront about being very product focused. So this is very much for the customer who's in the consideration phase. You know, will I buy this Adobe Marketing Suite product? Well, you can go and sign up for the webinar and see all the fabulous things people can do with the Adobe product. And so those ones are a lot more focused on the product detail because they're looking at customers who are at a different stage. So it's not about people who've never heard about Adobe, it's people who are considering the product. So they come and have a webinar and learn more about it. And then that post-sale phase, Prezi, I think, is doing a really interesting use of webinars. So Prezi is an online presentation software, kind of a competitor to PowerPoint. And for you to use Prezi, it's free. Anyone can sign up to use Prezi. But it's sort of, once you hear about Prezi, you're not quite sure what it is. Is it a presentation software like PowerPoint? How would I use it? So they use webinars in a couple of ways. One, for people who are completely unsure what Prezi is, they can go and join these regular Introduction to Prezi webinars and see what Prezi does. But the other interesting thing about Prezi as well is, although it's a free service, they also have a premium service as well. So they want customers to be satisfied with Prezi, and they want to upsell the premium service to them. A lot of people find Prezi quite difficult to transition to, so they have these ongoing webinars. At least once a week you can join a webinar that gives you all the basics and all the skills that you know to kind of go on and use Prezi successfully and hopefully convert to purchasing their premium services as well. And so that's a real kind of post-sale activity, because people have already bought into Prezi, but if they become frustrated with the product, they might go away from Prezi, or they might badmouth the product. So what are the strengths of webinar marketing? Well, there's a number of benefits. Firstly, profile building. So we've spoken a bit about how ComScore is using webinars to profile build, but you certainly see a lot of individuals on the web. I'm thinking of the people behind ProBlogger, for example, who've really grown a great personal brand or a personal presence from running a lot of webinars, sharing a lot of information, doing that thought leadership and driving awareness of their brand. Lead generation, so just that kind of traditional use of the webinar, which is about trying to capture the names and contact details of potential customers by offering them a really exciting webinar to come and join. Customer support and retention, so like that Prezi example, so using the webinar to make sure that once people have signed up to using your product and or service, that actually they might need a bit of ongoing education, and a webinar is a really great way to do that as an alternative. For example, just having a helpline that people would phone into. The other great thing about webinars, and probably one of the reasons why they're so of interest at the moment, is because as technology has gotten better, there's a relatively low barrier to entry. So time, cost, and skills, are usually one of the biggest challenges that people come up with in organisations for why they can't do something. But it takes very little time to set up a webinar versus, say, a conference or even a seminar. The costs can be fairly low, particularly if you're just kind of getting into webinars, and you don't need a lot of skill necessarily. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to hire or retain an expert to kind of produce your webinar. There's a lot of easy to use software out there that means that if you're the marketing manager, for example, you can manage your webinar from end to end. If recorded, and we'd certainly recommend that you do record your webinar, it's not just a kind of once-in-time event. It suddenly becomes a reusable asset that you can post to your website. You can make it a downloadable resource. If you've got social media channels, you can be promoting it on that. You could be hosting it on a video channel like YouTube. So once you've recorded it, it then becomes more than a webinar. It becomes a great media asset for the company. And the other benefit of webinars being digital is that there's a lot of analytics behind webinars. So they're very trackable and measurable, which most marketers are very interested in being able to track and measure what they're doing. And finally, just the sheer nature of webinars being interactive. Particularly if you're in the consideration phase of looking at a brand or a product or a service, it can be great to be in a webinar situation where you can interact, where you can ask questions. It can be a really nice format, or that opportunity to access maybe a sort of a speaker or thought leader in their area that you normally wouldn't have a chance to kind of ask questions and see them and have a back and forth with. So just the sheer interactive nature of a webinar is really beneficial to how the customer perceives value. Okay, so what are some strategies to build webinar exposure? Well, I look at it in that there are 3 ways to consider building your webinar exposure. And those 3 ways are creation, promotion, and what I call motion. So the promotion, the exposure of your webinar, you start building it way back when you're thinking about creating your first webinar. So, the recommendation would be create your webinar not just on something that, that you think, oh, that might be a good idea, but really looking at maybe customer feedback or web analytics data or search insights. So looking and seeing what are topics or themes that people are looking for more information on. Are you getting a lot of customer feedback? For example, I know that, for a long time, Prezi had a lot of customer feedback. We find it really difficult to create a presentation in Prezi. It's not like PowerPoint. So they were getting a lot of feedback and realised that there was something that if they created the webinar, it would get a lot of people talking and it would start to get a lot of exposure. The other thing is the next stage as well is looking at the actual kind of physical promotion, how you're going to promote your webinar. And that's simply, your list building. You should be building a list with each webinar that you create. I know that some people create a webinar and get a sign-up list, and then they create a new webinar and sort of set up another sign-up list. What you're ideally doing as a brand is building a list of contacts that you can keep re-inviting if it's appropriate to those webinars. And also thinking about creating a distribution network. So it's, again, it's not just about that once live event. It's about thinking about, you're going to have a recordable digital asset. How are you going to distribute that afterwards? How are you going to promote it? Is there a media publication that you could send the webinar to? Are you going to be distributing it through your social channels? Are you going to be hosting it on your website? And then something that's a little bit different and a little bit kind of quirkier thinking about promotion is collaboration. So sometimes as a brand, you might be finding it difficult to attract people towards a webinar because perhaps as a brand people don't think that you have an interesting story to tell. So by collaborating with another person or brand with a bigger profile, or even just collaborating with someone who has a different circle of contacts or a different network around them, then you end up cross-promoting each other, which can extend your reach into another area. And then the final recommendation about building exposure is just is keeping motion. So I often talk about content creation. If we're talking about video, why create one video when you could create 10 videos? And the same goes for webinars. Webinar is not just sort of a one thing that you do and that you hope the webinar is going to deliver a lot of results for your company. It's more about, I would say, thinking about a series of webinars or regularly running webinars, whether that's kind of quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, or whatever the customer need is. But it's about thinking that webinars are an ongoing marketing activity, not just a one-hit wonder. And then follow-up as well. I just think it's a kind of a real basic discipline that if you're going to set up a webinar as a piece of marketing activity, you've got to have a lot of follow-up to keep that exposure going. And that's probably like someone in your sales team making sure that they go and follow up with people that attended, or follow up with people who registered for the event and then didn't attend, and that maybe then you could send a video or some sort of recording of it out to them. So just a little bit more detail into creating content that customers want based on insight. So this is just your typical web analytics. So there's two ways that you can get insight about what your customers might want from their webinar content. The first is on-site, so looking at your web analytics, looking and seeing what is the most popular content on your website. Or also, and then this is a key one as well, what are people searching for on your website? So if you continually get people visiting your website and typing searches into the search box, they're quite often showing a consistent need, and you could create a webinar to that need. The other way that you can get insights is off-site. So I've mentioned, using search data. So that's using tools like, Google Trends and the Google Keyword tool to see what sort of information are people looking for wider on the web. So a lot of people use the web as their first port of call when they're looking for information, and also just that all-important kind of face-to-face insight from clients, just getting that customer feedback and realizing, hey, a lot of our customers are telling us they have this need, perhaps we should create webinar content around that. Recording and using the event. This is an example from HubSpot, which is actually an inbound marketing software company. I just thought this was a great little example. So here's their page that introduces the webinar, and they tell you about who the guest speaker is going to be, who's written a book on Twitter, and you think, gosh, I'd like to attend that event. And sometimes you'll see this huge mistake on websites where they say this event is now closed and you've missed it. Whereas you can see here very handily down the bottom, it's like you can view the archived video now. So it's about, a webinar shouldn't just be a one-off event. It should be something that you can use beyond the event to increase exposure. List building, so it's I think it's pretty standard to say, make sure you build your list, you're getting registration details. But something that I would say to think about is maybe what can you capture that's going to be slightly more useful information. So it's not just about we need to get people's names and the company that they work for, but maybe you're interested in getting them to check some boxes. Are you interested in whatever types of solutions that your product sells, or even asking people what is it that you would like from this industry, what are the information that you'd best like. So when you're building that list, making sure you build a list that you can segment properly and target the audience. and creating a distribution network as well. This is an example from Google Analytics. So Google, who owns YouTube, obviously they therefore run a lot of YouTube channels, but Google is very into educating their customers, and this is the channel that belongs to the Google Analytics team. So if you're interested in Google Analytics, they're building up a bank of content here. They're pushing it out on Google Plus and on their company blog, and so they've got a whole kind of network around them that when Google Analytics does a webinar, that's recorded and distributed across their network. Finally, collaboration, just a kind of example of what it looks like. So here's an example from Aweber, which is sort of a list building and an email service that you can use. So perhaps not so sexy, they're very product focused, but they did a collaboration with a site called Copyblogger, which has lots and lots of very well-known people, lots of really great advice for those people who are interested in professionally blogging or commercially blogging. And a lot of those people who work at Copyblogger, they're very well known for their expertise in the area. So what Aweber have done is teamed up with them. So they've got that opportunity for the cross promotion, and they've also managed to secure content that's going to be compelling for their customers. And just momentum, just to kind of show you, just remind you that Prezi is running these webinars all the time, so they're fully committed to webinar as an ongoing marketing tactic for them. And this is just a slightly different way of doing momentum. Doing a webinar series. Who says that you just have to do a webinar? I think we need to remember that people are very busy today. People have very short attention spans. If you want to cover a big, meaty topic, perhaps break it down into a series of webinars as well that people can kind of join, get a little piece of information, and then come back and get the follow-up to that webinar at another time. So what is the ROI of webinar marketing? Well, it goes back to this customer life cycle. So one of the big issues in marketing, not just in webinar marketing or content marketing, is that quite often people are looking for the one metric that measures. So for example, you might look at something like a webinar and be like, well, surely the success metric for webinars are how many people attended. But that's not exactly true, because it depends what you were trying to achieve. What was the objective of running the webinar in the first place? And what I mean by that is that the KPIs vary depending on what it was you were hoping to achieve from running that webinar. So for example, if you were hoping to have an impact on the customer during that post-sale phase, typical KPIs might be looking at customer retention. Does your customer retention improve for webinar attendees? Are you able to upsell? Thinking of that Prezi customer again. Do those people who attend Prezi webinars tend to stay signed up with the service and upgrade to the premium service? And even referrals. Do people who attend webinars go on and refer the service? Perhaps they become evangelists. And having a really good CRM system will help you track those kind of metrics. Over in the awareness phase though, your typical KPIs would be different. Here it would be straight up about exposure. How many people registered? How many of those registrations actually attended? And also, what were the type of attendees? You could have 100, 200, 500 people attend a webinar, but if they're not your target audience, if they're not going to be likely customers, then it's not really a success for you. And then finally, looking at webinar in that consideration phase, then the KPIs here are about conversions, and they are about attendance time as well. You can track what is the attendance time, where are people dropping off in a webinar. If you see a lot of people joining your webinar and then leaving after 5 minutes for a 1-hour webinar, they're probably not going to be considering your product. They probably didn't join the webinar, become completely convinced and leave and go and buy the product. So you can start to see how your webinar is actually impacting on the consideration phase. And also thinking about interactions. So remember, a webinar can be an interactive environment. There can be questions. You can be posting, in webinar polls, and you can see that level of interaction, and it can give you almost a temperature check about how that consideration phase is being impacted by your webinar. So B2B versus B2C. Well, you'll probably notice that most of the kind of examples that I've spoken to today have been B2B. It's not to say that I think webinar marketing is exclusively for B2B, but I think that it is a very focused marketing tactic, and I think that it is something that, because of the nature of it being organised, feels a lot more corporate than perhaps works for the B2C environment. So I guess I'm yet to see really exciting use of B2C webinar marketing, because I don't think of the average consumer as being the kind of person that wants to go and sit and have a webinar with a brand. But saying that, I think that if you're a smart brand and you know how a webinar can impact that customer life cycle, then perhaps go for it and see if a webinar is right for you. So my final bit of advice is that using analytics is really important, because using analytics throughout your webinar is what is going to make the webinar marketing work for you and your customers. There's got to be mutual benefit to both sides of doing a webinar. And there's 3 phases of that. There's before the webinar, during the webinar, and post-webinar. There's all a load of analytics that you should be gathering and looking at. So first off, before the webinar, you should be using all of your analytics data to kind of see what's happening on your site, what content is it that you need to be creating, what kind of need is there in your industry out on the web. You want to be looking to see registrations. There's no shame in experimenting with a webinar, announcing you're going to be running something, and only getting 2 sign-ups and saying, do you know what, it doesn't like this webinar is going to be successful. Let's change the topic. Maybe we haven't got the content right, and let's go back and start again. And also coverage as well. A really exciting webinar, a lot of people will start talking about it, maybe online and maybe in media, particularly if you've secured a high-profile speaker to join you for the webinar. During the webinar, there's a range of analytics that you can be capturing, things like the attendees, so not how many people have attended, but who has attended, and also when did they join? Did they join and remain on the call as well? What was your drop-off rate? You can do things like you can run in-webinar polls, so you can be gathering data as you're going, and if you've got a kind of a very slick team and a good setup, you can almost be changing content on the fly based on the data that you're getting halfway through, or perhaps if you're seeing a very steep drop-off rate, moving to your key information or your key points and wrapping the webinar up early. Your Q&A as well, so seeing, some webinars don't have any questions at the end of it, and I would say that it could be because people are less engaged with the webinar, so you need to really understand the analytics behind the Q&A and people asking questions. And engagement that takes place outside of the webinar as well. So, if you go to Twitter and run a search, you'll see a lot of people talking about, I am on a webinar right now listening to so-and-so speak about this. So during the webinar, you can see a lot of what people are talking. And I know myself, when I've conducted webinars, that we've had to change things fairly quickly, usually logistical things. So people are having a problem viewing the slides, or people are having a problem with the microphone and being able to hear me clear enough. So you should be keeping an eye on all of that during your webinar to make sure it's successful. And then post-webinar, it's about looking at what were the results, what was the feedback that you got? Do a lot of people go and write up and talk about your webinar afterwards, or talk about your company or brand? And long term as well. I mean, we're talking about recording this content and using it over the long term as well. So it's about thinking about not just how many people attended the webinar on the day, but perhaps how many customers downloaded that content or came to view that content over time. And that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Darika. That was great. We've got time for a few questions, actually. Darika, can I just ask you, how important is it to integrate social media channels into the strategy?
I think it's not so much about needing to integrate social with webinar marketing specifically, but all of your marketing should be integrated in that way. So, every marketer now needs a really great digital ecosystem, and I think this is just kind of one example where it's highlighting that, you should have those channels plugged in if your company's using them and that's available to you.
Great. Can you give some examples of how it would work in practice?
I think it's, it's from that kind of the sign-up process. So it's from, making sure I'll quite often go and sign up for a webinar, and then there'll be a tweet that you're attending this webinar, and then I'll tweet I've signed up for this webinar, and I kind of start the promotion going all the way through to the end where I say I just attended an amazing webinar. Here's the link. I might put that on my blog, or I might put it in a LinkedIn group, or I might put it on Twitter.
Okay, great. You agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of unnecessary upset about social media, and that people just need to treat it like conversation. And if your customers are going to talk about something that you're doing, that's absolutely brilliant. They might be doing that in the real world, but they might also be doing it via social media channels. And the great thing about social media channels is that, unlike the real world, we can hear those conversations, so we can offer in links, we can be helpful, and we can find out what's being said when we're not in the room. So for brands, that's great, but it is just another conversation type. And I don't understand why any organisation would want to try and suppress conversation, because it's going to happen anyway.
How important do you both feel that content marketing is going to be in the future?
Well, again, you know, content marketing is not so much a thing like a channel. I think people think, oh, we need to market via content marketing and that's a channel, but it's more like an approach that applies across the board to marketing. And the reason why we're all kind of getting hyped up about content marketing again is because of digital. People are now operating a lot of communication channels with their customers, and they need a huge content machine to keep that going.
Yeah. Steffan, I mean, basically, people are resistant, still to the hard sell.
Yeah.
How is marketing a webinar any different to marketing the product directly?
I think just back to what you were saying about content marketing, you know, there's something in it for the end user, there's something in it for us, the poor spods that have to receive all this stuff, if it's been built around understanding what we are going to find useful or interesting or entertaining.
So it's really important to have the audience as a sort of stakeholder then.
Yeah.
There's a real balance, because essentially what you're setting up with content marketing, and so webinar marketing as well, is a value exchange. So, you know, we talk a lot about the customer or the attendee, the audience has got to get a lot of value out of it, but let's not forget the business objectives as well, because you've got to achieve something. So it's about coming up with that balance where each side feels that they're getting enough value, that the kind of interaction was worth it.
And to sort of answer your question specifically, which I didn't do, I think the difference between selling come here, it's going to be really interesting for you, and come here and listen to our sales message. You know, if you can articulate that difference in the way that you market your webinar, and sell why someone might want to attend. You know, no one wants to attend a sales conference, right? Unless they're a salesperson learning more about selling. But you know, you've got to sell why it's interesting for them.
And leading on from that, how important is it to give stuff away for free?
I think people get really hung up when you start talking about giving away stuff for free. Again, I think it's about that value exchange. If you're desperate for your customers' attention, their money, or customer loyalty, then you're going to be having to give them stuff to kind of keep them in that engagement. If you have something that is so amazing and intrinsically valuable on its own, and you want to charge people for access to that, then that's something else as well.
Yeah, if you're not giving away stuff for free, you're mad, basically, because nothing that you can produce is of sufficient value for any of your would-be customers to only access it by paying you, because someone else will be doing what you're doing better or worse or the same, and they'll be giving away a taster for free. So if you really want to engage people and get their attention and let them feel like they would want to deal with you in the future, you're going to have to start to give away stuff so they can at least try before they buy. But it's obviously more complicated, or it's more far-reaching than that, because giving away stuff for free when there's no direct cost to you of every person getting value from it means you don't have to worry about how far it's going or how wide it's travelling. You can just say, if everybody who watches it gets a huge amount of value, that's a really great thing. Even if only 5 of them become customers, you haven't compromised on anything you're charging for by incentivizing people to get in touch with you by giving stuff away for free. I'm aware of 0 examples of businesses that have started to give stuff away that's useful or interesting or entertaining, who've come back afterwards and said, wow, our sales have halved. I just don't know of any examples where it's gone wrong in the way people, I think, fear it would.
So we've also talked about key performance indicators. I mean, many companies may not have that process as advanced as you discussed. So for you, what would be the main breakaway indicator of success?
Again, it's about, did it meet the business objective? If you sit around going, that webinar went well, then that's probably not enough to convince your senior exec or your board or whatever that it's worth the investment. It's got to be like, our objective was to retain more customers because we've had a high drop-off rate. Post-webinar, did that happen? Yes or no?
Okay. Treat it like dating. You know, someone walks away halfway through, it didn't go very well.
Great. Thank you very much, the two of you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'd like to conclude our webinar. And in doing so, I'd like to thank our expert speakers, Steffan Aquarone, the Econsultancy community's lead video trainer, and Darika, Ahrens, digital and social media expert with grapevineconsulting.com. We hope this has been informative for you, and if you'd like to access the slides from this presentation, they can be downloaded from bombora.tv. And please send any further feedback or requests for information to Steffan@bombora.tv. Thanks for viewing.